The Zephyrian homeworld of Kepler 442b had not seen sunlight in 3 cycles. The massive shadow cast by the Vorthon dreadnoughts blocked out their star, turning day into eternal twilight. In the underground shelters carved deep into the planet's crust, millions of blue-skinned Zephyrians huddled together, their large eyes reflecting the dim emergency lighting. Elder Thara pressed her 6-fingered hands against the quantum transmitter, its crystalline surface humming with desperate energy. Around her, the council of voices had gathered for what might be their final transmission into the void. Their people were dying, their cities burning above, and their military had fallen in less than a solar day. We broadcast this message to any civilization capable of receiving it. Thara's voice trembled through the translator matrix. We are the Zephyrians of the Kepler system. For 800 of your Earth years, we have been explorers, scientists, and peaceful traders among the stars. We have shared our knowledge freely, helped establish trade routes, and never raised arms against another species. The chamber fell silent, except for the distant rumble of Vorthon plasma bombardment. Thara's assistant, a young researcher named Kel, watched the energy readings spike as their message pierced through the interference field the invaders had erected around their world. The Vorthon Empire has come to our system without warning or negotiation. They demand our surrender and the transformation of our people into their slave workforce. Their ships number in the thousands. Their weapons turn our cities to glass. We have no military fleet, no weapons of war. We chose long ago to dedicate our resources to exploration and knowledge rather than conflict. Through the shelter's viewing port, Kel could see the massive forms of Vorthon harvester ships landing in what used to be their capital city. The invaders were already beginning their work, deploying extraction equipment to strip mine their world while the people still lived beneath its surface. Their technology was overwhelming, their ships the size of small moons, equipped with matter disintegrators and atmosphere processors. We know this message may reach civilizations who cannot or will not help us, Thara continued, her voice gaining strength despite her fear. We understand that involving yourselves in our conflict would bring the wrath of the Vorthon Empire upon your own worlds. They are ancient, powerful, and merciless. They have consumed 47 star systems in the past century alone. The quantum transmitter began to overload, its crystals glowing white-hot as it pushed the message across vast distances. Emergency coolant hissed through the chamber as technicians worked frantically to keep the system operational for just a few more moments. But if there are any among the stars who remember what it means to stand against tyranny, who believe that peaceful peoples should not suffer for their choice to trust rather than fear, we beg you to hear our call. We offer everything we have learned in our centuries of exploration, our star maps, our scientific discoveries, our cultural treasures. We ask only that our children might see another sunrise. The bombardment above intensified, sending tremors through the bedrock. Dust rained from the ceiling as Thara made her final plea. To any who receive this transmission, know that we do not ask you to die for us. We ask only that you remember us when we are gone. Remember that the Zephyrians chose curiosity over conquest, wonder over war. Remember that we reached for the stars not to claim them, but to understand them. As the transmission ended, something unexpected happened. The quantum array, designed only to send messages across the void, suddenly blazed with incoming signals. Not one response, but dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. The technicians stared in amazement as their screens filled with reply transmissions from across the galaxy. But one signal was different from the others, stronger, closer, carrying a complexity that made their translation systems struggle to process it. When the message finally decoded, it was brief, written in a language that somehow conveyed both gentleness and barely contained fury. Zephyrians of Kepler 442b, We received your call. We are humans from the Sol system. We know something about bullies who prey on the peaceful. Hold on. We're coming and we're bringing friends. Estimated arrival 6 standard hours. Prepare your people for evacuation. The cavalry is riding. Elder Thera stared at the message, not understanding the reference to cavalry, but feeling something she had not experienced in days: hope. Across the galaxy, automated systems were already calculating jump trajectories, and massive engines were spinning up to full power. In the Outer Rim territories, human colony ships began changing course. Mining vessels jettisoned their cargo and armed themselves with whatever weapons they could manufacture. Even civilian transports started mounting makeshift weapon systems as word spread through human space. Someone had called for help against the Vorthons, and humanity was answering. The message had been clear about one thing that would soon become apparent to the Vorthon Empire. They had made a grave error in assuming that all peaceful species were defenseless. Some species chose peace because they were wise enough to know the true cost of war, and some species, like humanity, chose to fight not for conquest, but for the right of others to remain peaceful. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant, watching as more ships appeared on her tactical display every few minutes. What had started as a rescue mission was becoming something else entirely. Word had spread through every human colony, every outpost, every independent trader in the sector. The call had gone out, and humanity was responding in force. Admiral, we're receiving reports from 17 sectors. The entire Third Fleet is adjusting course to Kepler 442. Colonial defense forces from 6 systems are en route. Even the Luna City Civilian Transport Union is mobilizing every ship they can find. Chen nodded grimly. The Vorthans had been expanding toward human space for decades, consuming world after world with their slave empire. Every intelligence report painted them as overwhelmingly superior in technology and numbers. But they had made one critical mistake in their calculations. They had assumed that because humans had never been conquered, it was because no one had tried hard enough. They were about to learn the difference between a species that had never faced adversity and one that had climbed to the stars despite being born on a death world, despite countless wars, despite every conceivable disaster their planet could throw at them. The quantum communicator crackled with an incoming message from Earth itself. Fleet Admiral Torres appeared on the main screen, her expression steel and determination. All human forces, this is Fleet Command. The Zephyrian situation has been escalated to a priority alpha response. The Senate has voted unanimously for immediate intervention. Rules of engagement are weapons free against all Vorthon vessels. This is not a rescue mission. This is a statement. We do not allow the peaceful to be enslaved on our watch. As Chen's fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system, what they saw defied belief. The Vorthon armada was massive beyond their worst estimates, but it was not the sight of enemy ships that caught their attention. It was what was happening around Kepler 442b itself. The planet was being systematically dismantled. Atmospheric processors were stripping away the breathable air while massive mining platforms tore chunks from the surface. The Vorthons were not just conquering the Zephyrians, they were erasing them, preparing to transform their world into another link in their empire's industrial chain. Signal all ships, Chen ordered, her voice carrying across the communications array to hundreds of human vessels now converging on the system. The Zephyrians called for help. Let's show these Vorthon bastards what that means. The Vorthan fleet commander, Zarketh, had conquered 47 worlds in his 2-century career. He had seen species surrender at the first sight of his dreadnoughts, others fight with desperate courage until their worlds burned, and a few attempt to bargain with resources or knowledge. Never had he encountered what was happening now. The sensor readings made no sense. Ships were appearing throughout the system, but not from a single point of origin as would be expected from a coordinated fleet. They emerged from hyperspace at dozens of different vectors. as if they had traveled from scattered points across the galaxy. Even stranger, the ship designs were wildly inconsistent. Military vessels alongside obvious civilian craft, sleek warships next to bulky cargo haulers that had been hastily armed with weapons. "Fleet Commander," his sensor operator's voice carried confusion. "The new arrivals are broadcasting identification signals. They claim to be human vessels from something called the Sol System. Our databases show no record of this species or their territorial claims." Zarketh's 4 eyes focused on the tactical display. The humans had superior numbers now, but numbers meant nothing against Vorthon technology. Their ships looked primitive, cobbled together from outdated designs. Some appeared to be actual cargo vessels with weapons welded to their hulls. It was almost insulting. "Open a communication channel," Zarketh commanded. "Let us see what these humans think they can accomplish." The main viewer flickered to life, revealing a female human in military uniform. Her expression carried a coldness that reminded Zarketh uncomfortably of his own people's warrior caste. But there was something else there, a controlled fury that made him pause. "I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Systems Navy. You are ordered to immediately cease all hostile operations against the Zephyrian people and withdraw from this system." Zarketh's mandibles clicked in what his species considered amusement. "I am Fleet Commander Zarketh of the Vorthon Empire. You speak boldly for a species we have never encountered. Do you understand what you face here? My dreadnoughts have reduced more advanced civilizations than yours to ash and memory." "We've heard about your reputation," Chen replied, her voice steady. 47 conquered worlds, billions enslaved. Very impressive record against peaceful explorers and agricultural worlds. Let's see how you do against someone who shoots back." The communication ended abruptly. Zarketh stared at the blank screen, then activated his fleet communications. "All vessels, prepare for combat operations. These humans appear to suffer from the delusion that their primitive vessels can challenge the might of the Empire. We shall provide them with a brief but educational demonstration of their error." But as the Vorthon ships began powering up their weapons systems, something unexpected began happening across the human fleet. Ships that had appeared to be mere cargo haulers suddenly deployed weapon arrays that rivaled his own dreadnoughts. What he had mistaken for primitive armor plating revealed itself to be advanced ablative shielding. And those outdated designs began moving with an agility that defied their apparent mass. The first exchange of fire taught both fleets valuable lessons. The Vorthans learned that human engineering favored redundancy and durability over elegance. Their ships absorbed devastating hits and kept fighting. The humans learned that Vorthon technology was indeed formidable, but built around the assumption of facing inferior opponents. Captain Maria Santos commanded the UES Relentless, a heavy cruiser that had been patrolling the frontier when the call went out. As Vorthon plasma beams carved through her forward shields, she watched her damage control teams perform miracles to keep her ship fighting. The Vorthons had superior firepower, but they seemed unprepared for opponents who refused to break under punishment. "Maria, this is Chen. Take your squadron and punch through their left flank. We need to reach those harvester ships before they can process any more of the planet." Santos acknowledged the order and led her squadron in a charge that would have been considered suicidal against any other enemy. But humans had learned long ago that sometimes the most dangerous course of action was also the most unexpected. The Vorthons had positioned their fleet to protect against a cautious, defensive opponent. They were not prepared for ships that deliberately flew into their firing solutions to get close enough for devastating short-range attacks. The UES Wolverine, a converted mining ship from the asteroid belts, proved that civilian vessels could be just as deadly as military ones when properly motivated. Captain Jake Morrison had spent 15 years blasting apart asteroids for valuable minerals. Vorthon dreadnoughts were larger than asteroids, but the principle remained the same. His industrial plasma cutters, originally designed to slice through solid rock, carved through Vorthan armor like it was made of paper. "This is Wolverine to all mining vessels," Morrison broadcast. "Remember, we're not trying to capture these ships intact. Treat them like any other obstacle that needs removing. Cut them apart and move on to the next target." The battle raged for hours, with human ships paying a heavy price for every meter of space they gained. But they were gaining ground, and the Vorthons were beginning to realize that this was unlike any conflict they had experienced. These humans fought with a coordination that suggested extensive combat experience, but more importantly, they fought with a purpose beyond mere survival. Down on Kepler 442b, the Zephyrians had felt their world shake as massive explosions erupted in the space above them. Elder Thara and her people watched through their sensors as the human fleet engaged the Vorthons, and what they saw challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare. The humans were not simply trying to destroy the Vorthan fleet. They were systematically targeting specific ship types: the atmospheric processors, the mining platforms, the transport vessels that would have carried Zephyrian slaves to other worlds. Every human attack was calculated not just to win the battle, but to minimize the long-term damage to the Zephyrian world and its people. "They're protecting us," Kel whispered in amazement, as they watched a human destroyer sacrifice itself to stop a Vorthon bomber from reaching their largest underground city. They came from across the galaxy to protect people they've never met. But the most remarkable moment came when a group of Vorthon ships broke away from the main battle, attempting to flee the system with captured Zephyrians already aboard their vessels. The human response was immediate and overwhelming. Every available ship converged on the fleeing transports, and the message broadcast on all frequencies was simple and clear. "This is Admiral Chen to all Vorthon vessels. You will return every Zephyrian you have taken, or we will hunt you to the ends of the galaxy. This is not a threat. This is a promise." Fleet Commander Zarketh found himself in an impossible position. His fleet was being systematically dismantled by opponents who should have been inferior in every way. Worse, they fought with a tactical doctrine he had never encountered. They seemed willing to accept enormous casualties to achieve objectives that made no strategic sense. Why sacrifice valuable ships to save alien civilians? Why focus on rescue operations when conquest was within their grasp? The answer came in the form of a direct communication from Admiral Chen. "Fleet Commander Zarketh, this is your final warning. Order the immediate release of all Zephyrian captives and the withdrawal of your forces from this system. Refuse, and we will demonstrate why the galaxy learned long ago not to threaten species under human protection." Under human protection? Zarketh's translator struggled with the concept. "You have no treaty with these beings, no alliance, no strategic interest in this system. Why do you waste your ships and lives for strangers?" Chen's response would later be recorded in both human and Zephyrian histories as the moment that changed the balance of power in their region of the galaxy. "Because they asked for help," she said simply, "and humans have never been good at ignoring a call for help, even when we should." The final phase of the battle began when Admiral Chen ordered a coordinated strike on Zarketh's command dreadnought. The massive Vorthon vessel was a fortress in space, protected by shields and armor that had never been breached in 2 centuries of conquest. But it had never faced the particular kind of insanity that humans brought to warfare. The attack came from every direction at once. Human ships that had been hiding among the debris of earlier battles suddenly came alive, firing from point-blank range. Vessels that appeared destroyed used their final moments to ram critical system nodes. Even civilian transports joined the assault, their hulls packed with improvised explosives as their crews evacuated to rescue pods moments before impact. When the smoke cleared, the Vorthon command ship was drifting powerless, its weapons silent, its mighty engines dark. Around it, the remnants of the Vorthon fleet were either destroyed or fleeing toward the edge of the system. The humans had won, but at a cost that sobered both sides. "This is Fleet Commander Zarketh." The transmission came through broken and weak. "I formally surrender my remaining forces and request terms for the safe passage of survivors." Admiral Chen's response carried no triumph, only tired determination. "The terms are simple, Commander. Release every Zephyrian captive immediately. Withdraw from this system and never return. Spread word throughout your empire that the Kepler system is under human protection. Any Vorthon vessel that enters this space again will be destroyed without warning." As the last Vorthon ship disappeared into hyperspace, the human fleet turned its attention to the real work. Rescue ships descended toward Kepler 442b, while others began the massive task of repairing the damage done to the planet's atmosphere and infrastructure. Medical teams prepared to treat both human and Zephyrian wounded, while engineers assessed what could be salvaged from the battlefield. The war was over, but the consequences were just beginning. 3 months after the Battle of Kepler 442b, Elder Thera stood in what had once been her people's greatest laboratory. The facility had been rebuilt with help from human engineering teams, but it was now something far more than it had been before. Where Zephyrian scientists had once studied distant stars in isolation, now they worked alongside researchers from dozens of species, all part of what the humans called the Mutual Defense Compact. The humans, it turned out, had not come alone to the battle. Their message of distress had spread through networks Thara had never known existed. Underground railways of communication between species who had suffered under Vorthon expansion, refugee communities who had escaped slavery, even sympathetic individuals within the empire itself who fed information to resistance movements. "Elder Thara," Dr. Amanda Foster approached with a tablet displaying stellar cartographic data. "We've completed the analysis of your astronomical surveys. Your people have identified 17 systems that the Vorthons have marked for future expansion. With this information, we can warn the inhabitants and offer them the choice to join our alliance." Thara accepted the tablet with hands that still trembled slightly when she remembered those dark days beneath the surface. "Dr. Foster, I must ask you something that has troubled me since your ships first appeared in our system. Why did your people respond so quickly? Your fleet arrived with resources and coordination that suggested preparation, not improvisation." The human scientist's expression grew somber. "Because this wasn't the first time we received such a call. 3 years ago, it was the Altarians. Before that, the reef builders of Tau Ceti. Each time we arrived too late. Ships full of refugees fleeing burning worlds, survivors' tales of destruction. We swore we wouldn't be too late again." The conversation was interrupted by an emergency alert. The facility's communication array had detected multiple hyperspace signatures entering the outer system, signatures that matched Vorthon fleet patterns. But as the first ships emerged, it became clear that something had changed in the 3 months since the battle. The approaching vessels were indeed Vorthon in design, but they transmitted identification codes that made the human patrol ships hold their fire. These were not invaders, but refugees. The civil war that had been brewing in the Vorthon Empire since their defeat at Kepler had finally erupted into open conflict. Admiral Chen materialized in the laboratory's holographic communications chamber, her expression grim but determined. "Elder Thara, Dr. Foster, we have a situation. 3 Vorthon refugee fleets are requesting asylum. They're carrying approximately 2 million civilians from worlds that have declared independence from the Empire. They're also bringing us intelligence about something called Project Extinction." Thara felt her blood chill at the translation. "What is Project Extinction?" "The Empire's final solution to the problem of resistance," came a new voice as a figure materialized beside Admiral Chen. The speaker was Vorthon, but smaller and less imposing than the warriors they had fought. "I am Engineer Velok, formerly of the Imperial Research Division. Project Extinction is designed to sterilize entire star systems of life, making them suitable for Vorthon colonization without the complications of existing inhabitants." Dr. Foster leaned forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her caution. "Sterilize how?" "Engineered stellar collapse," Velok replied matter-of-factly. "A cascade reaction that forces a star to consume itself in a matter of hours, rather than billions of years. The gamma radiation eliminates all organic life in the system, while leaving planets and resources intact for harvest." The implications hit everyone in the room simultaneously. Thara was the first to speak. "They intend to use this against any world that resists them." "Not just any world," Admiral Chen corrected grimly. "According to Velok's data, Earth is at the top of their target list. The Empire has decided that humanity poses an existential threat to their expansion. They plan to make an example of us." What followed was the largest mobilization in galactic history. The Mutual Defense Compact, which had started as an informal alliance of refugee species and resistance movements, transformed overnight into a military coalition spanning hundreds of star systems. Species that had been enemies for generations found themselves working together against the existential threat posed by Project Extinction. The Zephyrians, despite being the newest members of the alliance, found themselves at the center of the effort. Their unparalleled astronomical knowledge made them essential for calculating stellar mechanics, while their peaceful reputation allowed them to serve as ambassadors to species who might have been suspicious of human military intentions. Elder Thera stood before the Galactic Council, a hastily assembled group representing 47 different civilizations. The irony was not lost on her that they numbered exactly the same as the worlds the Vortons had conquered. Behind her, the massive holographic display showed the scope of the threat they faced. "Fellow representatives," she began, her voice carrying across the chamber through dozens of translation matrices, "3 months ago, my people faced extinction. We sent a message into the void, hoping against hope that someone would hear our call for help. The humans answered, but they did not come alone. They brought with them the dreams of every species that has ever looked up at the stars and believed that civilization could be more than conquest and domination." The display shifted to show the Project Extinction device, a massive construct that could be deployed near any star to trigger the cascade reaction. Intelligence reports suggested that the Vorthons had already built dozens of these weapons, hidden in asteroid fields and artificial planetoids throughout their territory. Now we face a choice that will define not just our individual species, but the very nature of galactic civilization. The Vorthon Empire offers us order through subjugation, peace through the silence of the grave. The humans offer us something far more dangerous, the possibility that free peoples can stand together against tyranny and prevail. A representative of the crystalline Nexari raised one of their multiple appendages. "Elder Thara, the human military is formidable, but the Vorthons possess weapons capable of destroying entire star systems. How can any conventional force stand against such power?" Thara's response came not from her own knowledge, but from months of working alongside human strategists and engineers. "Because conventional warfare is not how humanity thinks, Nexari Kethrin. They do not ask, how can we match their weapons? They ask, how can we make their weapons irrelevant?" The answer to that question was being constructed in secret across dozens of star systems. While the Vorthons prepared their stellar collapse weapons for deployment, the Allied forces worked on something the Empire had never encountered: a coordinated defense network capable of protecting entire regions of space. Captain Jake Morrison, the former miner who had become a hero at Kepler, found himself leading a squadron of the most unusual vessels ever assembled. Ships from 17 different species, each contributing their unique technological advantages to create something greater than the sum of their parts. Zephyrian navigation systems allowed for precision jumps that defied traditional tactical doctrine. Nexari crystal matrices provided shielding technology that could disperse stellar radiation. Even the aquatic depths dwellers contributed their expertise in fluid dynamics to create new forms of propulsion. But the most important contribution came from an unexpected source. The Vorthan refugees, led by engineer Velok, provided not just intelligence about Project Extinction, but detailed schematics of the weapons themselves. More importantly, they revealed the Empire's greatest weakness: their absolute dependence on centralized command and control. Every extinction device is remotely controlled from the Imperial Command Fortress at Vorthan Prime, Velok explained to the assembled fleet commanders. The Empire's leaders were too paranoid to allow such weapons to operate independently. If we could disrupt the control signals, the devices would automatically enter a safety lockdown. Admiral Chen studied the tactical projections with the intensity that had made her one of humanity's most respected military leaders. How close would we need to get to disrupt the signals? Close enough to be destroyed by conventional defenses, Velok admitted. The command fortress is protected by the largest fleet in the Empire, surrounded by automated defense platforms and shielded by technology that makes it nearly invulnerable to conventional attack. Nearly invulnerable, Chen repeated thoughtfully. What about unconventional attack? The plan that emerged from the strategic sessions would have been rejected as impossible by any traditional military thinking. It required perfect coordination between hundreds of fleets, the sacrifice of countless ships and lives, and the successful execution of the largest deception operation in galactic history. The deception began with leaked intelligence suggesting that the Allied forces planned a massive assault on the Vorthan industrial worlds in the Outer Rim territories. The Empire repositioned their fleets accordingly, leaving the core systems more lightly defended than they had been in centuries. At the same time, seemingly random raids began hitting extinction device construction facilities, making it appear that the Allies were trying to reduce the number of weapons available for deployment. In reality, every raid was carefully designed to force the Empire to activate their control protocols, allowing Allied intelligence assets to map the communication networks linking Vorthan Prime to their doomsday weapons. Each facility destroyed was one that had already completed its weapon and transferred it to deployment positions that were now known to Allied forces. The final phase of the operation began with what appeared to be a catastrophic failure. A joint human Zephyrian fleet emerged from hyperspace directly above Vorthan Prime, seemingly having suffered a navigation error that brought them out of FTL inside the system's gravitic interference field. The fleet was trapped, unable to jump back to hyperspace, facing the combined might of the Empire's home defense forces. Emperor Thax himself watched from the command fortress as his fleets moved to annihilate the foolish aliens who had delivered themselves into his grasp. "Begin stellar collapse operations," he commanded. "Let them watch their homeworlds die before we destroy them." But as the extinction devices activated across the galaxy, something unprecedented happened. Every single weapon simultaneously received a shutdown command from the command fortress itself. The Empire's own security protocols, designed to prevent unauthorized use of the weapons, had been turned against them by a virus hidden deep in their communication networks. Engineer Velok's voice echoed through the command fortress's corridors as security teams searched frantically for him. "Emperor Thax, this is the price of tyranny. When you make enemies of everyone, eventually someone finds a way to use your own strength against you." The trapped Allied fleet above Vorthan Prime was no longer trapped. Ships that had appeared damaged suddenly revealed themselves to be fully operational. What had seemed like a navigation error was revealed as the most audacious assault in military history. A direct strike at the heart of an empire, made possible only by the willing sacrifice of countless individuals who had given their lives to make the deception believable. As the command fortress fell silent and the extinction devices remained locked in their safety protocols, Emperor Thax broadcast his surrender to a galaxy that had finally stood up to tyranny and won. But the most important transmission came from Elder Thera, speaking once again to the stars, but this time with a very different message. To all civilizations receiving this signal, this is Elder Thara of the Zephyrians. 3 months ago, we called for help, and the galaxy answered. Today, we call not for help, but for hope. We call for all free peoples to join us in building something new, a galactic community based not on conquest, but on cooperation, not on fear, but on the courage to reach for the stars together. Years later, historians would mark the Battle of Kepler 442b as the turning point that transformed galactic civilization. But for the beings who lived through those events, the real transformation had been more subtle and more profound. They had learned that the universe was not divided between the strong who conquered and the weak who submitted. Instead, it was divided between those who believed that might made right and those who understood that right could make might, when enough people were willing to stand together and fight for what they believed in. The Vorthon Empire became the Vorthon Republic, their warrior culture slowly transforming into one that valued cooperation over conquest. The Mutual Defense Compact evolved into the Galactic Federation, with Earth and Kepler 442b serving as joint capitals of a civilization that spanned thousands of star systems. And in the museums of both worlds, visitors could see the preserved quantum transmitter that had started it all. The simple message from a peaceful people who had called to the stars for help, only to discover that sometimes the stars answer back with exactly what the galaxy needs most: warriors who fight not for conquest, but for the right of others to choose peace.